As far as my specific role with Megacat Studios, they've hired me on as a marketing manager. I have only been with them for a short time. I started with them as of PAX East, actually, so it's been about a month or so, but I'm getting all caught up to speed on everything. It absolutely has, but it's been absolutely incredible, which is kind of what Megacat's all about. It was specifically, I'd been going to bigger conventions for years, but I hadn't been to that one specifically, and it was also the first time that I actually got introduced to live wrestling as well, surprisingly. It wouldn't surprise me if that happens, especially given that I'd heard Reed Pop is the one who had acquired E3. I suppose they probably just sat down and thought it through and were like, well, we already kind of have this framework. Why try really hard to make that one work too when it'd been dwindling for a while? So I understand it, and I'm looking forward to getting to go to more PAXs. It's really fun. It was never something that was an interest for me at the time, but it was one of those, like, it just wasn't really on my radar, but I had lots and lots of friends who were into it. I heard about it all the time. Even now, I have friends who talk about it all the time, and it was just one of those, like, not on my radar. And then all of a sudden, WrestleQuest just slammed its way into my life, and now it's like, oh, you find yourself thinking about it an awful lot more than you used to. As far as I'm aware, just talking especially with, the guys at headquarters, it's a big thing about writing a love letter to two things that they love a whole bunch. They both love wrestling and they both love RPGs. When they sat down to make the game, they were, thinking about making another type of wrestling game. They're like, okay, well, we're going to have the combat, we're going to have this. And then they were like, we don't just want to make it about the wrestling itself. We want to make it about, the whole narrative of what's going on. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes that drives people's motivations, about the stories that they like to tell, about just general lives. So they wanted to make it something that's definitely a lot more. And this one specifically, there are so many different characters where you'll get to see lots of different sides, but not only that, there are certain sections of the story that focus on characters that are at different parts of their career, whether it is from, the novice perspective or from a hardened veteran, and it really changes the way you view the things that they've gone through. And not only that, we also have tied in a lot of the professional wrestlers as well. So there's just an absolute slew of side quests. There's one where Jeff Jarrett, his guitar is, I believe it's stolen or it's lost, and you have to go help him find it. And there's so many different paths like that where you get to tell all these really interesting stories. And, we worked really hard with the estates of lots of these wrestlers to make sure that it was something that really represented their legacy well. I don't know if you've seen, we did. So before I actually started with Mega Cat, they invited me up when they were doing their filming for Behind the Cat here at the beginning of February. And we actually had Jeff Jarrett there and DDP and a handful of others there filming with us. And we filmed this little series of, like, what if the wrestlers were working at the office with us? And one of them is Zach, the head of production, just getting absolutely nailed with a guitar. He's like, "Hey Jeff, does this guitar sound accurate?" And he's like, "Let me see," and just takes him out. It was so funny. Yep, yep, completely gone. So there's a whole series of those. They're very funny. Yes. Yeah, I think we have, an extra one that didn't get used. They're gonna put it up on the wall at work. You're like, "It's so expensive." Yeah. Well, even the guitars, I think the guitars are fairly expensive too, if I heard correctly, so just making things that are like breakaways like that, it takes a lot of special skill. Just a just a whole factory of breakaway items. That'd be funny. I don't know all of them specifically since I know they went through a whole bunch of them, but I did hear a handful of stories, especially. talking to Jeff Jarrett, who's been working with us a whole bunch. He was supposed to come with us to PAX, but for flight reasons wasn't able to make it. But he was one of the ones at the office. We've been working with him pretty closely. I know the guys were talking about so much, like the one of the biggest victories they had was getting word back from Andre the Giant's estate, especially, and just having them say like he would have absolutely loved this. So we would love for him to be able to be, like immortalized in the game this way. Um, it's one of my favorites. Oh, it's cute. But yeah, there's so many. I know we have Jake the Snake that we were working with. Like I said, DDP, Andre the Giant, Jeff Jarrett. There are so many more though. I believe we had at least like 20 or 30 that we were working with. I don't know how much personal investment they have, but I do know that they did have a good bit of input as to like what their storylines would be, just to make sure that it's something that would really represent them properly. And I think it was really exciting for them to be able to have input on their game because previously it's very much just like, here's your persona, we're going to port it over, into the game, and so somebody could just play as you. But this one is like they really this time get to tell, more about themselves. Well, and that's the thing. In order to have that interesting narrative, you do have to have people who play the hero, people who play the villain, or faces and heels in this scenario. Um, I'm a former theater kid, and that's where like I initially wasn't into wrestling. I was just like, oh, like there's just a lot of aggression. Like I just didn't think about it a lot. But now it's just like when you see it, there's so many interesting narratives that they're telling. And even, like the ones that we were doing at PAX, even we had a lot of like local wrestlers there and just seeing how they like came together to tell a story, to wrap in details of WrestleQuest, to wrap in details of what was going on at PAX specifically, people who were just walking by. It's a lot of improv. There's a lot of interest. And so it's like, yes, you have to keep this narrative going with the action at the same time. So it feels almost like improv, but with like stunt doubles. You know what I mean? Where it's just like there's a lot going on, so it's like you have to deal with safety, but you also have to make sure that you're staying in character. You're improving. You have to change what you're doing on the fly to please the audience, especially. Um, that's one of the big things that we did tie into the game is like having that hype meter specifically. That's really important to make sure that you keep the audience happy and interested. You know? Yeah. Mhm. Well, and as always, when you're trying to tell a story, there's a person who is overseeing all of it, making sure that, in the grand scheme of things, it's not just this one off match. We're trying to tell a bigger story. So you have to make sure that all of that works together. I wouldn't know that one specifically, but just from what I've heard in general, um, it was just one of those cases where they really wanted to be able to bring it to as many people as possible and not limit its reach, given that it is somewhat the first of its kind, honestly. Yeah. Um, just trying to make sure that it worked for everything. That's really mostly what I've heard from the guys at the office. I have been frustrated like that too before. And I'll say with certain games, especially, sometimes it can become difficult depending on what the specs of the game end up being, like what it ends up requiring. Sometimes that does leave certain consoles out. And I'm sure at a higher level, it also has to do with like, did a specific console commission this game or something like that? But in this case, it was very much they wanted this love letter to be able to be delivered to as many people as possible. I think mostly it's just being able to change face paints and change equipment. You're able to change like what buffs your walk on gives you. A lot of it changes, I'd say, a little bit more of the play style rather than a customizability of like, this is my self insert wrestling character, if that makes sense. Mhm. And by customizing it, it changes like what kind of bonuses it's going to be able to give you. So you're essentially deciding your buffs, and then there's also like the smack talking phase as well, where you can decide, if you can give the proper comeback to something, it decides whether you or your opponent might get an advantage with hype from the crowd. Yeah. So it's not specifically stats. A lot of that does have to do with the hype meter specifically, but it just gives your opponent the advantage in that case. So I do believe that it fills a special meter. My apologies. I have had limited playtime with the game as of now, so I'm just trying to get caught up on the general workings of MegaCat. But it does fill, more of a special meter that allows you to execute, higher moves. Um, it's just really interesting to me how it all crosses over with being an RPG specifically, where it's like, instead of a wizard casting fireball, you have somebody, doing a suplex instead, or being able to have like combination moves with the other members of your team as well. So I believe that's what was said previously, but Skybound specifically has asked us to just say this year as of right now. Mhm. It's one of those, we want to make sure that we're putting out the best version of it possible instead of saying like, "Well, we committed to this exact date, let's just throw it out there," and maybe it's not completely polished in the way that we want it to be. So, essentially, we're just committed to make sure that it is what we want it to be whenever we put it out there. Um, I'd say it's still likely, but they'd like us to just say this year as of right now. Yeah, well, and it's a delicate balancing act. It's like that same thing with the hype meter is like, okay, we need to like let you guys know what's going on. Here's some trailers, here's some stuff. We're gonna build the hype meter, but you can't wait too long. Otherwise, people start getting like, okay, where is this? Like it's been forever. But at the same time, you have to, be able to let people know that it's coming out and what's going on with it. But it's one of those things where we definitely just want to make sure that it's gonna be something everybody is going to absolutely love when it comes out. Oh, absolutely. Well, and thank you for chatting with me specifically, given that I'm brand new. I would love to. That's really what I'm getting into here is I'm learning, sort of all what makes MegaCat specifically tick. And since I'm managing marketing, I'm sure we'll be in touch more. Thank you so much. If you have any more questions or anything later, just let me know, okay? Sure, thank you. I hope you have a great day.